Patrick, thank you again so
Hi,
much for
Trisha.
your time. As I said, your work in mental health has just been brilliant. But I don't think we can associate the effect on people who have been sort of caught up and unwittingly trapped by all of this. I know compensation has been paid out, but money doesn't necessarily mend lives, and that feeling of giving everything and being cast aside.
No, absolutely. And you're quite right in your analysis, Tricia. There is a relationship between mental health and the hostile environment policy. The hostile environment policy worked on two key factors, fear and intimidation. So the fear side was if you haven't got proof that you're British, you must be legal and you'll be treated differently. So that's why people lost their jobs. Uh, got some people were made homeless because they couldn't pay the rent or mortgages. Some people were deported or threatened with deportation. And the intimidation bit was, if you can remember, there was these vans that used to drive around Britain saying "Go home." So these
Yes.
two factors is at the heart of the hostile environment policy. And this had an impact directly on those victims or survivors of scandal, because, as you said, a lot of people thought they were British in the first place. And then, I mean, one of the close friends of mine who died over 3 years ago, well, probably one's most high-profile Windrush campaigner, Paula Wilson, she countlessly said all the time that the hostile environment had an impact on her mental health. She kept on saying that she felt that she was treated like an alien, even though Britain was her home. And that reflects the impact on thousands and thousands of people caught up in the scandal, and not just them, but their children and even the grandchildren. This trauma has been transferred onto them, very similar to other aspects of traumatization. People don't really underestimate the impact of hostile environment policy. People think about borders, but it actually has an impact on people's lives. I don't know if you know, Trisha, we know officially at least 54 people have died connected with the scandal. And the majority of those who have died through the coroner's reports, the inquest juries have been either to, either hypertension. Hypertension is part of stress. So there is a causation link between this policy and its impact. And sadly, the compensation scheme does not properly acknowledge and recognize mental distress as
No.
a contributing factor, and that's why the scheme's not working. As along with the not recognising the loss of pension rights and other things as well.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking back before this came to light, because the scandal all started in 2010. I remember there being amongst my mum and her friends, every so often, someone would come up with, are you really British? Because so many people, as I said, the Home Office were the ones that destroyed the immigration cards, because in those
Mm,
days they were typed out and what have you. But there
yeah,
were so many scares. I remember my mum and her friends, every so often they would be scared, will Edith be sent back and what have you? Because they had come and made Britain their home, but they were
mm,
they were the nurses, they were the
yeah,
tube drivers, the bus drivers, they were helping Britain, and that's how they were proud. They were proud to come and help Britain, support Britain after the war. And then after all of that, and that's what people forget, they're paying their taxes, they're working, they're saving lives or
yes.
transporting people. Somebody turns around and says, by the way, we're going to deport you. You're not British. You know?
You're quite right, and I think that's why I think the British public actually recognise that it took the Windrush scandal, sadly, or I should call it the Home Office scandal, because when we use the word the Windrush scandal, it kind of undermines the hard work, the thriftiness, the contribution, which we still need to recognise. That's why I campaigned for a National Windrush Day, that we've got that. Sam King, who was a Windrush pioneer on the Windrush ship, served in the Second World War, created the idea of Windrush Day, and I worked with many others for years for us to get that day. But you're quite right, Trisha. I mean, the irony and the sad thing about this is that people make sacrifices, and
Mm.
compensation scheme does not reflect those sacrifices. And actually, ironically, the Home Office has re-traumatized the victims, because the paperwork to go through, the lack of empathy, cultural competency. And that's one of the reasons why Wendy Williams, who was commissioned by the government, when she did her report, Lessons Learned Review Report, she made 28 recommendations. And some of those recommendations was about the competency around culture and the history that the civil servants and even government ministers did not know the history of the Windrush and of empire, ironically.
Oh, now we've got some messages on Windrush. Hi, Trish. Boy, could we do with another Windrush today to help rebuild this broken country of ours. Yeah, but then after a while, when the people have done all the work, they'll turn around and say, by the way, you're not British, we're kicking you out. Windrush, greetings, Trisha. How disgraceful, deceitful, and dishonest to destroy people's landing cards. It's quite frightening to know that official persons in power could sink so low as to even conceive or think of using such dirty tactics. I'm ashamed of them, Trisha, says Susan. So, like you say, the British public really feels that, because especially people who are old enough, and initially, I've said it many times, there were those signs saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, and things like that, and they had to face a lot of discrimination, but they really helped put Britain back on their feet. Now, we touched upon, it's not just that generation, it can be their children and their grandchildren, because I guess if somebody's landing card is destroyed and they're told they're not British and they can't work and what have you, what happens to the citizenship of their children or grandchildren?
That's a very good question. And there are some cases where, like Glinda Caesar, who was she came to Britain as a child. She got caught up in a scandal. She's got children of her own, and one of her sons were refused a passport because of Glinda being rejected in the first place. So one of the key things and one of the key issues is about around citizenship and status, and the deportation flights, which still happen, by the way. The government always says that the people that's deported back to the Caribbean, they're not Windrush, but they are Windrush because they are the grandchildren of the Windrush generation. Just imagine someone from Australia, six generations of someone from Australia could come here, no problem at all. But yet we have served in the First World War, Second World War, and we've contributed to Britain. But and even certain Caribbean countries have to have visas. Like if you're coming from Jamaica, you need to have a visa to come in over here. Whereas if you're coming from Germany, ironically, you don't need a visa because well, it's different now because we're not part of the EU. But it's easy for a German to come over here than someone from the Caribbean whose ancestors laid their lives during the Great Wars on our behalf.
Yeah. One of the things I know, and I've touched upon before, I think it's in Jamaica, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a mental hospital because unfortunately some of the people who've been deported are people with mental illnesses. And they still they don't know what they've done wrong. They're confused. They're broken. And this is because that 1 in 4 of us will have a mental illness at some stage. If you happen to have been from the Windrush generation and had a card destroyed by the Home Office, you're seen as undesirable. Still messages coming in. Windrush, not a bit surprised, Trisha. This country is a disgrace treating those wonderful people like they did. Well done, Theresa May. But here's the thing. What was decided upon, the government has announced it's not going to implement 3 recommendations from a report by the head of the inquiry last year, including an introduction of a migrants commissioner, reconciliation events, despite they initially agreed to those things.
Yeah, and so this is why I think this is quite important because the government, when you read the government rhetoric, and I'm sure the government's given you a statement for your show to say that we care about the Windrush, we've offered X amount of money, we want to right the wrongs. Now, if they were serious about righting the wrongs, and righting the wrongs is a key principle of restorative justice. Righting the wrongs is biblical. At the turn of last century, either D.B. the Wells, African-American civil rights campaigner, was campaigning against what was happening in Deep South in America, turn last century lynching. She actually wrote a pamphlet saying we need to right the wrongs. So there's and that concept was used during the civil rights movement. So what the government's done, a bit like Jamie Oliver and Jerk Rice, they have misappropriated a part of black culture history to tell us that they're right and the wrongs, but they're not right and the wrongs, because if they were right and the wrongs, they would listen. We've had five
Yeah.
home secretaries, by the way, Trisha, five home secretaries since the scandal broke. Only one home secretary, and I'll let you guess this, only one home secretary has actually met victims of the Windrush scandal. Who do you think that
Wow.
is?
Go on.
Saved Javed. He's the only one. That's
Yes.
He's the only one that's actually met. All the other home secretaries have not even, I'm hoping James Cleverly, I bumped into him, I saw him at Parliament at the event. I said to James, 'cause I've known him for a number of years, please meet some of the Windrush victims, listen to their story, don't listen to your officials, don't
Yeah.
listen, don't listen second hand, third hand, fourth hand, meet people, listen to their concerns, and when you hear those concerns, I'm sure you'll do the right thing.
Yeah. Now, let
So,
me
so this is a
just
plea right now for the Home Secretary to meet a number of the Windrush victims, uh, just to hear their story. But the very fact that the government have rejected this recommendation of reconciliation events tells you, are they serious about righting the wrongs?
Yeah. Just to finish the vigil today that was held, which government, who from the government was there?
It wasn't really a government event. It was a community event
Oh, no, but
where
I'm just saying they would have known about this community event. Now, if it was me, if it was me in government, I would have hustled my backside down there to do just the sort of things you're talking about,
uh,
just to
yes,
spaces.
of course they were because we've had a lot of press coverage and we had various whole variety of media people there, and it's been covered in the newspapers over the last 2 days. So they are aware of that. But as I said to you before, there's only been one Home Secretary that's actually met survivors of Windrush scandal, and that was Saved Javed, roundabout, and that was 2019. Yeah.
No.
So the question is, so it's I think this is what's quite clear is it's not about compensation is not good enough. It's not even meeting needs, but it's about respect and dignity. The same respect
Yes.
and dignity that brought the Windrush generation here in the first place is the same respect and dignity that they want, and the government have not respected that or valued that.
Yeah, it's recognition, isn't it? It's recognition of the Windrush generation and what they how they helped Britain get back on their
Yeah,
feet. It's that pure and simple. And part of that recognition is actually not just, as you say, misappropriating, righting the wrongs, but doing it. Just getting on and doing it and not
yeah.
making it difficult, because I understand the process is very, very complicated. What is it? 17 pages of filling out forms and everything.
It's about 40 pages. Well, there's 40 pages for if you're a main claimant. Then if you're a claimant, like if you're a family member, you can claim. But sadly, quite a few people have died. So there's another form for estates. And I've been told that at the Home Office, they've got hundreds of these estate forms of people who've died before they could even claim for compensation in their own right while they were alive. It's just outrageous. This is a human rights issue right now as it was 6 years ago, Trisha. And that's the reason why we met in Brixton. We met in Brixton because that's seen as the home of the Windrush generation. We met in Brixton to acknowledge and to recognise those men and women who have died in Britain and abroad during this period, and also a renewed energy to say to the government that the compensation scheme is not working. It needs to be removed from the Home Office because the Home Office is not trusted by the community. The compensation scheme needs to be revamped. Still need to sort out status for people. And importantly, something that's dear to your heart, Tricia, mental health.
Yeah.
Thousands of the Windrush survivors and their families are suffering from post-traumatic stress,
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, and there's been no attempts by the government to acknowledge this, to reflect in the compensation scheme, and more importantly, to provide the type of counselling and support services during this difficult time for them. And
Yeah.
that's what's
No, I
required.
couldn't agree with you more. Just for people at home, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You've always had that passport. You've done your work. You've paid your taxes. You've always had that passport. And then suddenly turns around, somebody says, turns around and says, nah, you can't have that passport anymore, and you can't access anything at your bank account, not a job, nothing at all, and you live like that, and your grandchildren and your children have to live like that while some pen pusher fiddles around with your 40 pages of forms. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Patrick Vernon, OBE, Windrush campaigner,